The frozen pager beeped once in the evidence bag, its LCD screen still displaying a message that shouldn't exist. November 2024, and a team of climate researchers from the University of Hawaii stood in stunned silence around their discovery. 30 years buried in volcanic ice on Mauna Kea, the Motorola Bravo had preserved perfectly, along with climbing gear that would finally answer questions about what happened on that mountain in 1994. Before we begin the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We're really curious where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a rating. The message on the pager read, "Meet me alone 4 a.m. Summit." The timestamp showed 3:45 a.m. November 15, 1994. But according to the official record, Tyler Morrison and Derek Nakamura had left together from the Mauna Kea Visitor Center at 6 a.m. that morning. Someone had lied, and someone had been keeping that lie for 3 decades. Mauna Kea rises 13,796 feet above the Pacific, its summit home to the world's most advanced telescopes. Sacred to native Hawaiians, forbidden to climb without proper respect. In 1994, it was also the site of fierce competition among graduate students fighting for limited research grants. The mountain had seen its share of accidents, altitude sickness, sudden weather changes, disorientation in the thin air. But what happened to Tyler Morrison wasn't an accident. Tyler was 26 that November, a volcanology grad student from UC Berkeley with an obsession for documenting Hawaii's rare silver sword plants. These silver-leafed succulents grew only on volcanic peaks, blooming once before dying in a spectacular display. Tyler had spent 3 years photographing them, building a dissertation that would revolutionize understanding of high-altitude adaptation. His Kodak disposable cameras captured hundreds of specimens, each carefully cataloged in notebooks he carried everywhere. The morning of November 12, 3 days before the tragedy, Tyler sat in a Kona coffee shop, his excitement barely contained. The letter from the National Science Foundation lay open on the Formica table, coffee rings already staining its edges. $50,000. The Mauna Loa research grant was practically his. Years of work vindicated. His companion across the table hadn't touched his macadamia nut pancakes. Derek Nakamura, 28, had started the PhD program the same year as Tyler, also studying volcanic ecosystems, also applying for the same grant. They'd been friends once, back when there seemed to be enough opportunity for everyone. But the dot-com boom was pulling funding toward technology. Environmental science grants were shrinking. This might be the last major funding for years. "Congratulations," Derek said, his voice flat. He wore a University of Hawaii baseball cap pulled low, the same one he'd worn since undergrad. "Guess they liked your pretty flower pictures." Tyler folded the letter carefully. "It's not final. They're announcing next month." "Come on, we both know that letter means you've got it." Derek stood, threw a 20 on the table. "I've got to check equipment for Thursday's climb." Thursday's climb? Their monthly tradition, documenting seasonal changes at elevation. Derek had suggested adding the summit route this time, said the weather would be perfect. Tyler had agreed. Why wouldn't he trust his research partner? Brittany Chen understood the mountain better than either of them. At 24, she was the youngest astronomy PhD student working at the Mauna Kea Observatory. She spent her nights at 14,000 feet operating the Keck telescope, searching for exoplanets when that field was still new. She'd met Tyler at a graduate mixer, bonding over late-night data analysis and tower records runs for new Radiohead albums. Their relationship was supposed to be secret. Academic politics, Derek's obvious interest in her, the complication of Tyler possibly leaving for a postdoc position. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves. Like when Tyler's Ford Explorer was parked outside her Hilo apartment 3 nights a week. Or when Derek had seen them together at Blockbuster, Tyler's arm around her waist as they argued playfully about renting Pulp Fiction again. The visitor center at 9,200 feet served as the last checkpoint before the summit. November 15, 1994, 5:47 a.m. according to the faded receipt that would later be found. 2 power bars, 2 bottles of Gatorade, 1 pack of Dramamine for altitude sickness. The cashier, a part-timer named Kawika, remembered them because of the argument. Derek wanted to take the Humu'ula Trail, Kawika would tell investigators. Tyler insisted on the standard route. They went back and forth for like 10 minutes. Finally, Tyler gave in, said something like, "You know the mountain better." But Shane Caldwell knew the mountain best. At 31, he'd been volunteering as a hiking guide for 5 years, every weekend, rain or shine. The kind of dedication that made him invaluable to the understaffed Park Service. The kind of dedication that also provided perfect cover for his side business, unauthorized guided climbs for cash. $50 per person to see the sunrise from the summit. No permits, no questions. Shane was already at the visitor center that morning, though he wasn't scheduled to work. The receipt from his coffee purchase showed 5:30 a.m. Just checking conditions, he'd said later, being helpful. That's what Shane did. He helped. He'd helped lead the search when Tyler and Derek didn't return. He'd helped comfort the families. He'd helped point investigators toward the wrong trails. The summit log at Puwekyu was a simple notebook in a weatherproof box. Climbers sign in, a tradition and a safety measure. November 15, 1994, 2:47 p.m. Derek Nakamura, incredible views. Tyler had to descend early, altitude sickness. But Tyler Morrison never had altitude sickness. His medical records pulled later showed he'd summited Denali the previous summer. 20,000 feet, no problems. His physiology was adapted to thin air, his blood oxygen levels exceptional. Derek would have known this. They'd trained together. The astronomy telescope operator's log from that afternoon noted something else. 4:12 p.m. Single figure descending summit trail. Unusual solo descent, noted for safety records. 1 person, not 2. By evening, concern was growing. Brittany had expected Tyler by 6 p.m. They had plans to drive to Honolulu, catch Bush playing at the Pink's Garage, spend the night at a hotel on Waikiki. She'd paged him twice, no response. At 8 p.m., she drove to the visitor center herself, found only Derek's rental car in the lot. But it was at the wrong trailhead, not where they'd started, but 5 miles away at the Mauna Kea access road. Shane Caldwell was the one who called it in. 9 p.m., 2 experienced climbers missing, possible altitude emergency. He organized the search with remarkable efficiency. Grid patterns, radio frequencies. He knew exactly where to look, or more precisely, where not to look. Weather came in fast, Shane told the rescue coordinator. Seen it before. Temperature drops 20 degrees in minutes up there. They probably tried to shelter, maybe in the ice caves on the north face. There were no ice caves on the north face. But the search team spent 16 hours checking anyway. The pager clipped to Tyler's belt should have been the first clue. Derek claimed Tyler descended due to illness at 2 p.m., but the pager showed messages from Brittany at 6:17 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. If Tyler had descended, if he'd been anywhere with signal, the pager would have received those messages hours earlier. The device only updated when it came within range of a tower. Tyler never made it down the mountain. The search continued for 5 days. November in Hawaii meant tourist season was ramping up, the hotels full of mainland families escaping early winter. The local news covered it briefly, pushed aside by the ongoing O.J. Simpson trial coverage that dominated every television. 2 missing hikers on Mauna Kea, probably lost in the volcanic landscape. Tragic, but not uncommon. Derek's story evolved with each telling. First, Tyler had felt dizzy at 13,000 feet. Then it was 12,000. Then Tyler had insisted on descending alone while Derek continued to the summit for their research. The inconsistencies were attributed to trauma, shock. Derek was grieving his research partner. Everyone could see how devastated he was. Shane Caldwell found Tyler's backpack. Day 3 of the search in a lava tube half a mile from the standard trail. Water bottle still full. Cameras missing. The Hawaiian Airlines ticket stub tucked in the inner pocket seemed irrelevant then. A return flight to Oakland, December 3rd. Of course Tyler had a flight home for the holidays. But Shane had a ticket too. Same pocket of his volunteer vest where he kept his park radio and first aid supplies. Hawaiian Airlines to Portland, November 16th, the day after Tyler disappeared. One way. Paid cash. He'd canceled it, of course, once the search started. Couldn't leave during an emergency. Shane always helped. The official report concluded accidental death by exposure. The volcanic landscape of Mauna Kea was unforgiving. Temperatures near freezing at night. Oxygen levels 40% lower than sea level. Derek Nakamura was questioned but never suspected. His grief seemed genuine. He dedicated his eventual dissertation to Tyler's memory, though he never did get that grant. The committee found his work derivative, lacking originality. He left academia, became a high school chemistry teacher in Pearl City. Brittany Chen left Hawaii 2 months later, transferred to MIT, finished her PhD there. She never talked about Tyler, never returned to the islands. Some grief is too deep for words, some suspicions too painful to voice. The years passed. Clinton's scandal dominated 1998. Columbine shocked everyone in 1999. The new millennium came without the Y2K disasters everyone feared. The internet transformed from dial-up curiosity to broadband necessity. Digital cameras replaced film. GPS units became standard hiking equipment. And on Mauna Kea, the winter ice preserved its secrets. Shane Caldwell built a reputation. By 2000, he'd started his own guide company, legal this time, properly licensed. His intimate knowledge of the mountain made him the go-to expert for documentary crews, researchers, adventure tourists. He wrote a book, Sacred Summit, Respecting Mauna Kea. He gave talks at REI stores across the mainland. The hero who'd tried to save those lost climbers back in '94. He married a local teacher in 2001, had 2 kids, coached Little League, served on the town council. The kind of guy who still helped elderly neighbors with groceries, who organized beach cleanups, who everyone called Uncle Shane. His house in Waimea had photos from decades of rescues, grateful families, saved hikers. Tyler Morrison's photo wasn't among them. Some failures, Shane would say, you never forget. The climate research team that made the discovery in November 2024 wasn't looking for bodies. They were studying ice melt patterns, documenting how rising temperatures were affecting Mauna Kea's permafrost. Dr. Sarah Winters from UC Irvine had brought ground-penetrating radar to map ice depth. What she found instead was an anomaly 30 feet down, metallic objects in a pattern that didn't match geological formations. "We thought it was old scientific equipment," she would later tell investigators. "The mountain's been used for research since the '60s. But when we started excavating, the first thing we found was the pager. A Motorola Bravo Plus, the premium model from 1994, the kind drug dealers and doctors carried because it could display actual text, not just numbers. The ice had preserved it perfectly, battery long dead, but LCD screens still readable when they changed the batteries with period-correct AAs. That single message? Meet me alone, 4 a.m., Summit. The timestamp preceded Derek's account by 2 hours. If Tyler had received this message and gone to meet someone, Derek's entire narrative collapsed. But Derek Nakamura, now 58 and teaching chemistry at Pearl City High School, maintained his story when contacted. "Tyler was my friend," he insisted to the FBI agents who arrived at his classroom. "We climbed together dozens of times. That morning was supposed to be routine documentation. When he started feeling sick, I offered to descend with him. He insisted I continue for the data. I should have ignored him. I should have gone down anyway. The FBI's involvement came through federal jurisdiction, crimes in national parks, plus the interstate element once they realized Shane Caldwell's ticket to Portland connected to something larger. The lead investigator, Special Agent Monica Torres, had worked cold cases for 15 years. She knew that time revealed patterns invisible in the moment. Pull Shane Caldwell's financial records from 1994, she instructed her team. Credit cards, bank statements, everything. What they found was interesting. November 1994 showed unusual activity. 3 cash deposits of $9,000 each, structured to avoid federal reporting requirements. The money came 2 weeks before Tyler's disappearance. Payment for something, or silence about something. Shane Caldwell was 61 now, still running his guide company, though he'd slowed down, let younger guides handle the summit routes. When agents arrived at his Waimea home, he was packing gear for a sunrise photography tour. His reaction to their questions was practiced calm, 3 decades of preparation showing. Tyler Morrison? Yeah, I remember. Tragic situation. I led the search myself. We looked everywhere. Agent Torres laid out the evidence slowly. The pager, the timestamp, the receipt showing Shane at the visitor center at 5:30 a.m. when he wasn't scheduled to work. I often checked conditions early, Shane explained. Safety first, that's always been my motto. What about this? Torres produced a scan of the Hawaiian Airlines ticket. You were leaving the island the day after Tyler disappeared. Personal emergency. My mother in Portland had a heart scare. When the search started, I canceled immediately. You can check the records. They had checked. His mother had been perfectly healthy. No hospital admissions in Portland that entire year. But Shane didn't know they knew that yet. The Kodak disposable camera found with Tyler's remains told a different story. The film, preserved by ice and carefully developed using period-appropriate techniques, showed 36 exposures. 35 were silver sword plants, Tyler's research subjects, each carefully framed and documented. But exposure number 36 was different. The photo showed a group of 8 people on the summit at sunrise. Tourists by their clothing, mainland fleece jackets, brand-new hiking boots, the kind of gear people bought at Sports Authority the day before vacation. And in the corner, clearly visible, was Shane Caldwell, leading an unauthorized tour. Date stamp from the camera's manufacturer suggested this was November 14th, the day before Tyler disappeared. Tyler photographed you, Agent Torres said. He had evidence of your illegal guide operations. Shane's lawyer, brought in once the questioning turned serious, tried to minimize. Even if my client conducted informal tours 30 years ago, the statute of limitations— Not for murder, Torres interrupted. The financial investigation revealed more. Shane's cash deposits matched withdrawals from an account belonging to Robert Hutchinson, a California construction executive who'd vacationed in Hawaii that November. Hutchinson, now 78 and living in assisted care, remembered the trip clearly when questioned. I wanted my family to see the sunrise from Mauna Kea, he said, but permits were impossible to get. Someone at our hotel mentioned a guy who could arrange things. 50 per person, but for an extra 500, he'd guarantee we'd have the summit to ourselves. No other tourists. He was very clear. If anyone saw us, if anyone took photos, the deal was off. 8 people at $50 each, plus $500 for exclusivity, $900 per trip. Shane was running 3 trips a week during tourist season, tax-free income worth protecting, worth killing for, if someone threatened to expose it. The VHS security footage from the Mauna Kea Observatory provided another puzzle piece. The tape, grainy and deteriorated, had been digitized in 2010 during a general archive project. Enhanced with modern software, it showed 2 figures at 3:15 p.m. on November 15th, Not on the summit, where Derek claimed to be, but on the access road near the ice caves, the real ice caves, on the eastern face, where Shane had specifically directed search teams away from. Brittany Chen, now Dr. Elizabeth Chen, after changing her first name to distance herself from the trauma, was teaching at MIT when agents contacted her. She'd never spoken publicly about Tyler, but the discovery of his remains had brought everything back. "I knew something was wrong with Derek's story," she admitted. "Tyler never got altitude sickness, ever. We'd climbed together in Colorado that summer, 14ers. He was fine. But when I tried to tell the police, they said I was grieving, emotional. Derek was so convincing. Everyone believed him." She'd kept one thing secret all these years, a microcassette from her answering machine, the kind everyone had next to their landlines in the 90s. Tyler's last message, left at 5:45 a.m. the morning he disappeared. His voice was excited, nervous. "Britt, it's me. Quick change of plans. Derek wants to try a different route, says he knows a shortcut. But I saw something yesterday, got it on film. That guide, Shane, the one everyone trusts, he's running illegal tours. I'm going to report it when we get back. Might be a story there for the university paper. Anyway, should be back by 4. Radiohead tonight. Love you." The university paper. Tyler had written occasionally for the Berkeley student newspaper, environmental pieces mostly. A scandal about illegal tours on sacred Hawaiian land would have been exactly his kind of story. Shane Caldwell would have been ruined. His volunteer position, his reputation, his under-the-table income, all gone if Tyler's photos reached publication. Derek's involvement became clearer through phone records, pulled from GTE Hawaiian Tel archives. November 14th, 11:47 p.m. A 17-minute call from Shane Caldwell's home to Derek Nakamura's apartment. Then Derek calling Tyler at 11:65 p.m., suggesting they meet earlier, take the Humu'ula Trail instead of the standard route. Shane knew those trails. He'd know exactly where someone could disappear. "Shane offered me $5,000, Derek finally admitted, his lawyer negotiating immunity in exchange for testimony. Not to hurt Tyler, never that, just to make sure Tyler went to a specific location at a specific time. Shane said he wanted to talk to him, work something out about the photos. I thought it was about money. Tyler would delete the pictures for cash. Everyone wins." Derek's story unraveled further. Shane had known about the grant competition, had heard Derek complaining about it at Kona Brewing Company, where guides and grad students mingled. Shane had played on Derek's resentment, his financial desperation. $5,000 was more than Derek's entire teaching assistant stipend for a semester. "I set up the meeting," Derek continued, told Tyler that Brittany wanted to meet him at the summit early, had something important to tell him. "I gave him the pager message, said she'd asked me to relay it since she was at the observatory overnight. Tyler was confused but excited. He thought maybe she was going to say yes to moving to California with him." The pager message had been Shane's idea. Analog devices, no real trace of who sent what. Shane had used a payphone at a Shell station in Waimea, called the paging service, entered the message. Simple, untraceable in 1994. What happened at that 4 a.m. meeting became clearer through forensic reconstruction. Tyler had arrived at the summit in darkness, expecting Brittany. Found Shane instead. The conversation would have been short. Delete the photos or face consequences. Tyler, idealistic and stubborn, would have refused. He believed in protecting the mountain, respecting indigenous sacred sites. Shane's illegal tours were exactly the kind of exploitation Tyler opposed. "It was supposed to be an accident." Derek's voice on the FBI recording was barely audible. "Shane said he'd scare Tyler, maybe rough him up a little, make him delete the photos and forget about reporting anything. But Tyler fought back. Tyler always fought back." The ice caves on Mauna Kea's eastern face were formed by ancient lava tubes, frozen over centuries. In November, before climate change thinned the ice, they were deep and hidden. A body could stay frozen there indefinitely. Shane knew every cave, every crevice. He'd explored them all in his 5 years of guiding. The forensic evidence, preserved by 3 decades of ice, told the rest. Tyler's Timex Ironman watch, the kind every outdoor enthusiast wore in the 90s, had stopped at 4:37 a.m. The altimeter showed 13,450 feet, not the summit at 13,796, but the elevation of the eastern ice caves. The temperature reading, -12 Celsius, fatal without proper gear. Tyler's jacket was never found. Shane had returned to the visitor center by 6 a.m., calm enough to chat with arriving tourists about trail conditions. Derek had continued to the actual summit, signed the log, created an alibi. The plan required Derek to claim Tyler descended with altitude sickness. Shane would then discover Tyler had gotten lost, lead searches in the wrong direction. After a week, the case would go cold. Another tragic accident on the mountain. But they hadn't counted on the camera. Tyler's Kodak disposable, the one with evidence of Shane's illegal tours, was supposed to be destroyed. Shane had taken it from Tyler's body, thought he'd thrown it into a crevasse. But in his rush, in the darkness, he'd grabbed the wrong camera. Tyler carried 2, one for research, one for personal shots. The personal camera went into the crevasse. The one with Shane's group photo stayed with Tyler's body, frozen in the ice cave. The revelation shattered Shane Caldwell's carefully constructed life. 30 years of being Uncle Shane, the hero who tried to save those lost climbers, the respected guide who wrote books about mountain safety. His wife, Melanie, sat in their Waimea living room staring at photos from decades of family barbecues, charity events, church fundraisers. Their children, now adults with kids of their own, couldn't reconcile the father they knew with the evidence mounting against him. "Dad wouldn't," his daughter Kayla insisted to reporters. "He saved dozens of lives on that mountain. He's the one who pushed for better safety regulations." But the FBI had built their case methodically. The pager message, the timeline, the financial records, Derek Nakamura's testimony, and now the most damning evidence. Shane's own words, preserved on a microcassette tape that Derek had secretly recorded in December 1994. Derek had been paranoid after Tyler's death, afraid Shane would eliminate him as a loose end. He'd bought a Radio Shack micro-recorder, the kind journalists used, and taped their conversation when Shane came to pay him the final installment of the $5,000. Shane's voice on the tape was calm, matter-of-fact. "Nobody needs to know what happened up there. Tyler made his choice. He could have deleted those photos, walked away. Some people don't understand how things work. The mountain takes people sometimes. That's what everyone believes. Keep it that way." When agents played the tape for Shane in the interrogation room, his lawyer requested a break. They conferred for an hour. When they returned, Shane had a proposal. "My client will provide a full account," the lawyer announced, in exchange for consideration regarding charges. Agent Torres shook her head. "Murder 1, premeditated. Your client lured Tyler Morrison to that summit." The true story emerged over 6 hours of recorded testimony. Shane Caldwell had built his entire life on Mauna Kea. Not just the illegal tours, though those had paid for his house, his car, his kids' college funds. It was the reputation, the respect. He was somebody on this island. Without the mountain, he was just another Hale who'd moved to Hawaii thinking paradise would solve his problems. "I'd been running tours for 3 years," Shane admitted. "Small groups, respectful people. We never left trash, never damaged anything. It wasn't about disrespecting the mountain, it was about sharing it. And about money. $900 per trip, 3 trips a week during high season, tax-free. Over $100,000 a year when his legitimate job at a sporting goods store paid $15,000. In 1994, that was the difference between renting a studio apartment and owning a 3-bedroom house with an ocean view. Tyler Morrison was going to destroy everything, Shane continued. Not just the money, my reputation, my volunteer position, everything I'd built. For what? For some grad student article that nobody would even read? The meeting at 4 a.m. had been planned carefully. Shane knew Tyler would come if he thought Brittany was waiting. He knew the exact spot where cell phone signals, what few existed in 1994, couldn't reach. He knew which ice cave was deepest, most hidden. I offered him $10,000 to destroy the film, Shane said. Cash, more than he'd make in a year as a teaching assistant. He laughed, said the mountain was sacred, that people like me were parasites. The physical altercation had been brief. Tyler was younger, stronger, but Shane had something Tyler didn't: desperation. 30 years later, Shane still insisted it wasn't murder. He fell. The ice was slick. He hit his head. I could have called for help, but then everything would have been over. My life, my family's future. So I made a choice. The choice to drag Tyler's unconscious body to the ice cave. The choice to take his jacket, ensuring hypothermia would finish what the head injury started. The choice to return to the visitor center and pretend nothing had happened. The choice to lead searches away from the eastern ice caves for 5 days while Tyler's family waited for news. Shane's wife Melanie filed for divorce 2 days after his arrest. His children stopped answering reporters' calls. The guide company he'd built collapsed overnight. 20 employees suddenly jobless. The ripple effect spread through the small community of Waimea like a volcanic shockwave. But it was Tyler's mother, Margaret Morrison, who provided the most devastating response. Now 78, living in a retirement community in Berkeley, she'd kept her son's room exactly as he'd left it in 1994. Posters of Pearl Jam and Soundgarden on the walls, his geology textbooks on the shelf. A Blockbuster rental card in the desk drawer with a $3 late fee he'd never paid. I knew my son didn't die in an accident, she said at the press conference. A mother knows. But everyone said I was grieving, in denial. For 30 years, I've wondered what really happened on that mountain. Now I know. Tyler died because he tried to do the right thing. The investigation revealed other victims of Shane's schemes. Not murders, but tourists who'd paid thousands for exclusive summit tours over the decades. Many had thought they were supporting conservation efforts. Shane had told them the money went to maintaining trails, protecting native plants. Instead, it had paid for his boat, his vacation home in Maui, his children's private school tuition. Robert Hutchinson, the construction executive whose family had taken that fatal November 14th tour, felt particular guilt. If we hadn't hired him, if we hadn't created demand for those illegal tours, Tyler Morrison might be alive. We thought we were just bending rules. We didn't think about consequences. Derek Nakamura's immunity deal required full cooperation, but it couldn't protect him from public judgment. Pearl City High School placed him on administrative leave, then accepted his resignation. Parents didn't want their children taught by someone who'd participated in covering up a murder, regardless of his legal status. I was 28 and desperate, Derek said in his only public statement. The grant money meant everything to me. My career, my future. Shane knew that. He exploited it. But I made the choice to help him. I've lived with that guilt for 30 years. Tyler was my friend. I betrayed him for $5,000. Derek moved to the mainland, changed careers, became an accountant in suburban Sacramento. He never returned to Hawaii, never published scientific research again. The grant he'd wanted so desperately had gone to neither him nor Tyler, but to a third candidate who studied coral reef degradation. The research Tyler died protecting, his documentation of silver sword adaptation, was finally published posthumously by his advisor, with all proceeds going to Hawaiian conservation efforts. Brittany Chen, now Dr. Elizabeth Chen, established a scholarship in Tyler's name at UC Berkeley, the Tyler Morrison Award for Environmental Ethics, $25,000 annually for a graduate student committed to protecting sacred indigenous sites. She funded it herself, never remarried, dedicated her life to the kind of scientific integrity Tyler had died defending. The trial began in September 2025, federal court in Honolulu. Shane Caldwell, now 62, faced charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and wire fraud related to his decades of illegal tour operations. The courtroom was packed every day, local news competing with court TV for coverage. Hawaii hadn't seen a trial this sensational since the Massey case in the 1930s. The prosecution presented their case methodically. The pager, the photos, the financial records. Derek's testimony, devastating in its detail. The micro-cassette confession. Expert witnesses explaining how the elevation and temperature in the ice cave would have caused death within hours, even if Tyler had regained consciousness. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt. Shane's lawyer argued that Derek was the real killer, that he'd acted alone and blamed Shane to get immunity. They pointed out that no one had actually seen Shane at the summit that morning. The evidence was circumstantial, they claimed. A tragedy had been twisted into a crime by overzealous prosecutors. But then the prosecution introduced their final witness, Kawika Palama, the part-timer who'd worked at the visitor center in 1994, now 55 and managing a hotel in Kona. He'd never spoken up before, afraid of Shane's influence in the small island community. But with Shane in custody, Kawika finally felt safe enough to tell what he'd seen. Shane came back to the visitor center at 6:15 that morning, Kawika testified. I remember because my shift started at 6 and he was already there, drinking coffee. But his clothes were different from when I'd seen him at 5:30. Same jacket, but different shirt underneath. And his boots were wet, covered in ice. I asked if he'd been up to the summit already. He said no, just checking the lower trails. But there's no ice on the lower trails in November, only at the top. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Shane Caldwell showed no emotion as he was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to FCI Sheridan in Oregon, ironically not far from Portland, the city he'd tried to flee to 30 years earlier. The aftermath continued to ripple through Hawaii's tight-knit outdoor community. The state implemented new regulations for Mauna Kea access, stricter permit requirements, harsher penalties for illegal guide operations. The mountain's indigenous protectors, who had long fought against exploitation of the sacred site, saw Tyler Morrison as an unlikely ally, a hollow who died defending what they'd always known, that some places are more important than money. In November 2025, exactly 31 years after Tyler's death, a memorial was installed at the Mauna Kea Visitor Center, a simple plaque with his photo, his dates, and a quote from his journal. "The mountain doesn't belong to us. We belong to the mountain." Margaret Morrison was too frail to travel for the dedication, but she sent a letter to be read aloud. "My son loved science, but he loved justice more. He could have looked away, ignored what he saw, stayed safe. But that wasn't Tyler. He believed in doing what was right, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost him everything." The ice caves where Tyler had been found were permanently closed to the public, marked as a cultural preservation site. Climate change meant the ice was melting anyway. Within a decade, scientists predicted the caves would be gone entirely. But the truth they'd preserved for 30 years had finally been revealed. Shane Caldwell's story became a cautionary tale in Hawaii's tourism industry. The respected guide who'd killed to protect his illegal empire. The hero who was actually a villain. His book, Sacred Summit, was pulled from shelves, copies destroyed by the publisher. His name was removed from trail markers he'd helped establish. It was as if the island was trying to erase him, the way he'd tried to erase Tyler. But some things can't be erased. Derek Nakamura, living quietly in Sacramento, still woke at 4 a.m. sometimes, the time he'd told Tyler to meet Brittany at the summit. He'd see his friend's face, excited and trusting, heading into darkness. The guilt was his life sentence. No immunity deal could commute that. Dr. Elizabeth Chen continued her research at MIT, discovering 3 potentially habitable exoplanets that made international headlines. But she never forgot the nights on Mauna Kea with Tyler, looking at stars and planning futures that would never happen. She kept one photo from 1994, Tyler grinning at the summit, holding a silversword plant he'd just documented. The Pacific spread endlessly below. On the back, in his handwriting, "Brittany, this is what matters. Love always, T." The Morrison family received a settlement from Shane Caldwell's seized assets, though no amount could compensate for 30 years of not knowing. They donated most of it to the Hawaii Nature Conservancy, specifically for silversword preservation. Tyler's research, finally published, became the foundation for new conservation protocols that saved several endemic species from extinction. In his cell at FCI Sheridan, Shane Caldwell had plenty of time to think. The walls were covered with photos his children had sent before they stopped writing. Family Christmases, graduations, grandchildren he'd never meet outside prison walls. He'd gained 30 years of freedom by hiding Tyler in that ice cave. But the ice had melted. The truth had emerged. The mountain, in its own time, had delivered justice. The pager that started it all was returned to the Morrison family after the trial. Margaret had it preserved in a display case, along with Tyler's research notebooks and his UC Berkeley diploma. Sometimes she would look at that frozen message, "Meet me alone, 4 a.m., summit," and wonder what would have happened if Tyler had simply ignored it. If he'd stayed in his tent, waited for real sunrise, climbed with Derek as planned. But that wasn't who Tyler was. He'd received what he thought was a message from someone he loved, someone who needed him, so he'd gone. Into the darkness, into the cold, into the truth that would take 30 years to surface. The climate researchers who'd found Tyler's body continued their work on Mauna Kea, documenting the mountain's changing ice patterns. Dr. Sarah Winters, who'd first detected the anomaly with ground-penetrating radar, often thought about the randomness of discovery. A few feet to the left or right, and they would have missed the metal signature. A year later, and the melting ice might have moved everything beyond detection. The window for justice had been narrow, measured in meters and months. The story made national news for weeks. Murder on the Mountain. Frozen Justice. The Guide Who Killed. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. Netflix announced a limited series. Books were written. But for those who'd known Tyler Morrison, who'd loved him, the media coverage felt hollow. They'd lost 30 years of not knowing. Now they'd gained a lifetime of knowing too much. The final irony came in 2026, when researchers studying Tyler's preserved silversword documentation made a breakthrough in understanding plant adaptation to climate change. His work, frozen in time like his body, contained observations about cellular resilience that modern scientists had missed. A new technique for crop protection in extreme temperatures was developed, potentially saving millions from famine as the planet warmed. Tyler Morrison had died protecting the mountain's integrity. 30 years later, his research might help save the world. Shane Caldwell had killed for money, for reputation, for the small power of being important on one island. He'd gained 3 decades. He'd lost everything. The mountain remained. Mauna Kea, White Mountain, sacred summit, where the earth touched the heavens. Where scientists searched for other worlds while standing on stolen land. where the ice was melting, revealing secrets and sins, where Tyler Morrison had died believing that some things were worth more than money, more than comfort, more than life itself. He'd been right. The pager's message, "Meet me alone, 4 a.m., Summit," became evidence catalog number 94-11-15-001 in the federal case file. But for Margaret Morrison, it was the last communication her son had received, the lie that had led him to his death. She donated it to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, part of an exhibit on 1990s technology and crime. Visitors could see the Motorola Bravo Plus, read about the case, understand how analog devices had enabled a murder, and then, decades later, solved it. Shane Caldwell appealed his conviction twice, both times denied. His argument that the evidence was too degraded, too circumstantial, fell apart against the weight of testimony and technology. He'd been so careful in 1994, thinking ahead to potential investigations, constructing alibis and false trails. He hadn't imagined that the mountain itself would preserve the evidence, that climate change would become the detective that solved the case. In the end, it came down to greed and preservation. Shane had killed to preserve his illegal income, his reputation, his comfortable life. Tyler had died trying to preserve the mountain's sanctity, its protection from exploitation. The ice had preserved the truth, and time, patient and inexorable, had revealed everything. The last entry in Tyler Morrison's field journal, found with his body, was dated November 14, 1994, the day before he died. Photographed something troubling today. We'll need to report it. The mountain deserves better than being sold to the highest bidder. Some things should remain sacred. Some things should remain sacred. Tyler Morrison had believed that, had died for it. And 30 years later, frozen in ice and time, his belief had been vindicated. The mountain had kept his secret until the world was ready to hear it, until technology could reveal it, until justice, delayed but not denied, could be served. The story of Tyler Morrison and Shane Caldwell became required reading in Hawaii's park ranger training program. A reminder that the difference between hero and villain could be as thin as ice, as fragile as reputation, as permanent as death. That the mountain remembered everything, even if it took decades to tell its secrets. In the end, Mauna Kea stood unchanged, 13,000 feet of volcanic rock and ice reaching towards stars that Tyler had once watched with Brittany, planning futures that Shane Caldwell had stolen. The telescopes continued their search for other worlds. The ice continued to melt. And in federal prison in Oregon, an old man who'd once been trusted with the mountain's safety counted days that would never end, winters that would never thaw. A sentence as frozen as the body he'd left in an ice cave, thinking he'd gotten away with murder. He hadn't. The mountain had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. 30 years was nothing to a volcano that had been growing for 1,000,000 years. Justice, like lava, might move slowly, but it was inexorable, unstoppable, and in the end, it always found its way to the surface.